Buenos Aires, December 2001. The streets smell of burnt rubber, cheap tobacco, and a sticky desperation that no amount of rain can wash away. Imagine two men standing on opposite sides of a smoky street. One is a senior manager at a bank's central branch, a man who has dedicated 20 years of his life to studying financial instruments, complex derivatives, and risk management. On his monitor are numbers representing millions of Argentine pesos. He has grown accustomed to thinking of himself as the architect of the system, part of an elite group that understands the rules of the game better than anyone else. The other is an ordinary mechanic from a poor suburb who has barely graduated from high school but has kept a few cans of gasoline, a box of heavy tools, and a small bag of old silver coins left to him by his grandfather in a corner of his dusty garage. Today, this bank manager stands in a humiliating line for free soup because his digital millions were frozen by the stroke of the president's pen one winter night. The mechanic calmly exchanges a liter of gas for a week's supply of fresh food for his family. Most people, looking at this, think that this is the story of the collapse of a single South American country. It is not. We are conducting this economic autopsy not to rehash old news, but to show you your own future in the year 2026. There is hidden knowledge that is worth only a few cents of your attention today, but in the very near future, it will be worth more than the entire gold reserve of your local bank. It is knowledge of how the institutional dependence of your capital works and how it turns into a noose in moments of systemic crisis. But before we reveal this critical secret, you must ask yourself one hard, almost cruel question. Do you really believe that the money in your fancy banking app belongs to you? Are you willing to entrust your family's survival to a line of code on a remote server that can be erased, blocked, or devalued at the behest of someone you don't even know? Write in the comments right now what percentage of your life savings exists exclusively in digital form, and whether you could buy a loaf of bread if your bank server went offline indefinitely tomorrow. This isn't just a question of financial trust. It's a fundamental question of your survival as a free economic entity. The modern banking system is the largest fiat experiment in recorded human history, and we're approaching its final, most destructive phase. But here's the part that no one tells you about on the evening news. Every systemic collapse in the past has had its own distinct forensic history. In ancient Rome, it was the slow corruption of the coin. As the denarius's pure silver content gradually decreased from 95% to virtually zero, turning the symbol of imperial power into a piece of cheap copper covered in a thin silver mask. Today, we see the same process, but it happens not over decades but instantaneously and in invisible digital form. The move to centralize central bank digital currencies, or so-called CBDCs, is not the evolution of consumer convenience that the commercials would have you believe. It's the creation of the perfect digital cage for the middle class, where your every move, every purchase, and every coin you save is under complete surveillance. Think about that for a moment before we go any further. Imagine money that has an expiration date. Money that you can't spend on certain goods because your social rating doesn't meet established standards of environmental friendliness or political loyalty. Money that simply evaporates from your account if you don't spend it within 30 days to stimulate artificial economic growth. This is not a science fiction movie script. These are technical specifications of protocols that are being developed right now in the closed offices of central banks around the world. We conduct economic autopsies here so that you don't become the next anonymous case in the global collapse report. If you feel that the noise of official financial reports is preventing you from seeing the real existential threats, subscribe to this channel. Here we examine the forensic evidence of financial crimes against your capital that institutions will never voluntarily disclose. Subscribe if you are ready to see the truth that the vast majority ignores while the doors of the bank vault are still open. Your capital today is not gold, not silver, or even paper. It is a derivative asset at its worst. It depends entirely on the smooth functioning of an infinitely complex and at the same time fragile infrastructure, from the cooling systems of server farms in Virginia to the integrity of submarine cables in the Atlantic Ocean, and on the political will of people who consider your private property to be just a statistical error in their global plans. This is institutional dependency at its purest and most dangerous. The more complex a system is, the more vulnerable it is to any external or internal shock. In 2026, we may face what future economic historians will call the Great Digital Reset. When the $315 trillion global debt becomes mathematically unserviceable, even with endless money printing, the only logical way out for the system is to completely reset the rules of the game. And in this new game, your old digital savings, accumulated over decades of work, may simply not pass the validation process in the new control system. History has left a clear forensic trail here for millennia. During every great redistribution of wealth, the first to suffer and lose are those who held their assets in instruments that required the system's permission to exist and use them. In the Weimar Republic of 1923, people who trusted the government and held government bonds lost generations of wealth in a matter of months of hyperinflationary hell. Those who managed to convert their capital into underlying physical assets, from professional tools to gold coins, not only retained their economic dignity, but also gained incredible leverage in the new world. Digital money is not gold. It's not even paper money that you can hold in your hands and hand to your neighbor without an intermediary. It's the promise of a promise, encrypted in bits of information. It's a scarcity of information about the real state of assets, wrapped in a convenient mobile interface that creates the illusion of complete control. This is something that you never read in college economics textbooks, but real capital is what you have left in your hands when the system decides to turn off the general switch. We call it existential leverage. If you have a skill that people need for daily survival, or a physical object that cannot be printed, counterfeited, or deleted from a database with a click of a mouse, you have anti-fragility. Let's go back to the example of the Argentine collapse. In December 2001, the government imposed strict restrictions known as corralitos, a limit of 250 pesos per week on cash withdrawals. People saw their virtual thousands on ATM screens every day. They felt rich in the digital space, but in the real world they couldn't even buy antibiotics for their children with those numbers. The system simply said, your money is really our money, and you will only get the meager share that we see fit to allocate to you today. CBDC is a corralito built right into the very architecture of your currency. It is the technical ability for the state to impose negative interest rates directly on your personal account, without any intermediaries in the form of commercial banks. Imagine waking up in the morning and seeing that your purchasing power has automatically decreased to zero by 0.5% simply because a central algorithm decided to stimulate consumption by punishing savings. At such a moment, every digit of yours becomes your enemy. You cannot withdraw this money and put it under your mattress because cash will be outlawed or withdrawn from circulation. You cannot easily convert it into gold or land without special permission from a regulator that monitors your every transactional step. You are locked into a system that is slowly but surely eating away at the fruits of your labor. The crash of 2026 will not be like the classic stock market crash of the 20th century, with panic on the exchanges and screaming traders. It will not be just a falling red graph on your television screen. It will be a silent, almost imperceptible change in the terms of your own life. The vast majority of people will not even realize what has happened until they try to make a transaction that goes beyond their individual consumption limits or goes against the current political agenda. Consider this forensic fact. Every single fiat currency in human history has had a 100% failure rate and complete devaluation. None of them has survived in the long term. The average lifespan of paper money is about 27 years before it loses a significant portion of its value. We have long since crossed this critical line for the current global dollar standard, which is held together only by remnants of military power and the inertia of trust. The digitization of currencies is not progress. It is simply a last-ditch attempt to prolong the life of a zombie system by establishing total, surgical control over every unit of capital. When the aggregate debt becomes mathematically impossible to repay, even theoretically, the only way to save the system is to destroy this debt along with the savings of those naive depositors who financed it with their trust, that is, with your savings. This is the same great redistribution of wealth that we constantly warn about in each of our autopsies. Your accumulated numbers in the bank are just fuel for this giant bonfire of redistribution. But what exactly does true physical autonomy look like in our hyper-digital age? This does not mean that you should immediately move to live in the deep forest and completely abandon all modern technology. It means that you should consciously break the institutional dependence of at least some of your capital by creating your own financial safety zone. Understand the fundamental difference between a derivative and an underlying asset. Stocks of large corporations, government bonds, bank deposits, all are derivatives. They have value only as long as a complex and honest infrastructure of trust and legal protection exists. The silver or gold coin in your hand, the can of high-quality fuel in your garage, the box of ancient seed in your pantry, or your personal ability to repair complex industrial equipment are underlying assets. They have an intrinsic inherent value that is completely independent of whether the main server is in New York or London today. History has taught us a lesson that we ignore at our own peril. In times of great tectonic shifts in the economy, it is not those who have the most virtual numbers on paper who win, but those who have the fewest intermediaries between themselves and the basic means of life. We are rapidly approaching a tipping point where the complexity of the global system will exceed its capacity for effective self-regulation. This is the point where the signaling noise becomes so deafening that real price signals disappear completely, leaving only chaos. You already see it today in the inflation that politicians call temporary, in the astronomical debts that are called strategic investments, and in the new digital currencies that are being sold to you under the guise of freedom and inclusivity. Here's the part that no one tells you openly, but that each of you feels intuitively looking at your receipts in the stores. The coming crisis will not just be a crisis of asset value, it will be a crisis of access to resources. You may have 1 million virtual units in your account, but if you don't have access to the gateway to convert those numbers into real goods because your account is blocked or the system crashes, you are actually poorer than a person with 1 loaf of fresh bread in your hands. In Argentina, in 2001, wealthy families from prestigious neighborhoods exchanged their expensive jewelry from world brands for bags of corn and flour from simple farmers who could not read complex financial statements but were very good at counting their real reserves in units of energy and calories. Our economic autopsy clearly shows that every great empire, before its final fall, created a grand illusion of infinite wealth by artificially complicating financial instruments and increasing the number of intermediaries. The Romans did it through physical debasing of currency. We do it today through total digitalization and uncontrolled credit bubbles. The handwriting of history remains identical. Only the technological tools of control and manipulation change. CBDC is simply a modern digital form of coin corruption, which allows the authorities to do it much faster, more efficiently, and most importantly, with much less resistance from the population accustomed to the convenience of cashless payments. What can and should you do today to avoid becoming a victim of this process? First of all, soberly realize the degree of your personal institutional dependence. Analyze each of your assets through the prism of one simple question. Will this object exist and have value for other people if tomorrow the world finds itself in conditions of a global internet failure or an indefinite bank holiday? If the answer to this question is no, then you do not actually own capital, but only a temporary permission to use part of someone else's capital, and all permits have the unpleasant property of being revoked in times of major crises by a unilateral decision of the person who issued the permit. Your existential leverage in 2026 will depend entirely on your ability to function and provide for your family outside of a rigid digital cage. This doesn't just mean owning physical precious metals that have stood the test of time for millennia. It means creating your own decentralized reserves of essential commodities that will always have a high barter value in any situation. And most importantly, it means investing daily in your own anti-fragility, in your practical knowledge and skills that cannot be confiscated, taxed, or simply deleted from a central database. This is not paranoia. It is a sober surgical look at the undeniable forensic evidence of all economic history. The system is not designed for your personal prosperity or financial freedom. It is designed for its own self-preservation at any cost. And more often than not, that price is paid by your own capital. The crash of 2026 is just another perfectly natural chapter in the great book of global wealth redistribution. You may be the one who reads this book intently, bracing for every twist and turn. Or you may be the one whose name will simply be erased from its pages with a flick of a digital pen. Always remember that mechanic from Buenos Aires. He was no more educated or intelligent than his banker neighbor in terms of academic knowledge. He was simply much less dependent on a system that, one cold December day, decided it no longer owed him anything. When the number dies, and it will, because such is the inexorable nature of all fiat experiments, the only thing that will really matter is your personal, physical autonomy and your ability to create value in the real world. Think about it today. Prepare in advance. And never let the convenience of a shiny digital interface blind you to the inevitable economic autopsy that has already begun behind the scenes of official news. History has already given us all the answers we need. They are lying on the surface. The question is whether you are personally ready to accept them and act on them while you still have some time to maneuver. Every day that you remain 100% within the digital financial system, you are effectively doubling your risk of losing everything. Start your personal economic autopsy right now without waiting for tomorrow morning. Test each of your assets for their level of anti-fragility and institutional independence. And remember the main rule of survival in times of chaos. In a world where everything around is becoming ephemeral and digital, only that which you can confidently hold in your own hands will have real, eternal value. We will continue to closely monitor all forensic signs of collapse so that you are always 2 steps ahead of the system that is trying to swallow you up. Be vigilant, be anti-fragile, and do not allow yourself to become the next nameless case in the report on the lost generation of digital savers. The crash of 2026 has already left its first clear mark on the sands of time. Are you finally ready to see it? See you in the next autopsy, where we will take an even deeper look at what they are trying to hide behind the walls of their digital banks. Protect your capital while it is still yours.